FY21. The committee will come to order. Good morning. I want to thank all of the members for joining us for today's hearing. Given today's virtual environment, I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time to address technical difficulties that may arise with such remote proceedings. Without objection, so ordered. Before we start this hearing, I have a few housekeeping points. We are holding this hearing virtually in compliance with the regulations for committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 965. Consistent with regulations, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. As a reminder, members testifying today will be required to unmute themselves when they are yielded to for their 3-minute testimony. We are not permitted to unmute members unless they explicitly request assistance. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. They will not unmute you under any other conditions. To ensure that committee members are given the opportunity to question each witness, we will have one round of 5-minute questions after witness testimony has concluded. To that end, the chair would ask each witness to stay in the hearing until members of the committee have had the chance to ask questions. Each member of the committee will be given 5 minutes to question the witnesses, and we will proceed in order of committee seniority, alternating between the majority and the minority. Finally, for members of the Appropriations Committee, we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups, including documents to be inserted in the record by unanimous consent, amendments, motions, other unanimous consent requests, and so on. That email address is houseappropriations.submissions@mail.house.gov. If you didn't get that down, it has also been provided to your staff. I would remind all members that they must verbally request unanimous consent out loud, separately from sending the document or written unanimous consent request to the email address. Thank you for your patience and understanding as we navigate this new technology and platform. And thank you for joining us today for what I believe is the first ever full committee member day hearing. Member input is central to the work of the Appropriations Committee, and we have already received tens of thousands of submissions from members about their priorities that our subcommittees have taken into consideration as they assemble bills. Considering the extraordinary circumstances facing our country, and in keeping with our tradition of subcommittee member days, we look forward to hearing directly from our colleagues about their priorities today. I now recognize Ranking Member Granger for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowey, for hosting this hearing today. It's important that we hear from members about their priorities before we start marking up appropriations bill. We're going to have a lot to do in the very short amount of time with all the appropriations markups and floor action taking place in a 4-week stretch. In order to do this, we'll need to work out issues in advance. We've done that before and we'll do it again. I thank the chairwoman for taking the time to listen to members today, especially those on our side of the aisle, as these bills are being drafted. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. And I thank the ranking member for her statement, and we're ready to hear from our colleagues joining us today to provide testimony. We will now hear from the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, for 3 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm here today to advocate for 3 distinct but related issues in dire need of funding: community health centers, telehealth, and rural broadband. The COVID-19 pandemic has made clear that community-based health care must be a top priority for Congress. Community health centers reach the most vulnerable Americans, including low-income and rural Ohioans. CHCs provide primary health services in medically underserved areas. In my district, there are 5 federally qualified community health centers. Throughout the pandemic, these CHCs have ensured access to COVID-19 testing, alongside continuing to provide primary care to reduce hospital crowding. CHCs are a trusted resource in their communities, treating patients and providing education on public health and best practices. I wholeheartedly support the work of CHCs and ask for their robust funding through the Health Resources and Services Administration. In support of telehealth, during this public health emergency and beyond, telehealth services offer a viable alternative and secondary access point to care. Connecting providers with patients from the safety of their own homes, telehealth keeps the most vulnerable away from high-risk zones, but it also helps with care continually for patients with other health needs or with mobility challenges. Additionally, telehealth keeps costs low by pushing down bills related to in-office care, eliminates the need to travel long distances to the nearest provider, and reduces time off for appointments. For rural residents, telehealth can also help them avoid weeks of waiting for the next appointment in an area served by far too many providers. This pandemic has revealed how successful telehealth can be at rapidly expanding access to care. That's why greater resources are urgently needed to develop telehealth capabilities across all communities in support of rural broadband connectivity. Telehealth services, unfortunately, cannot work without broadband service. For many Ohioans, connectivity isn't an everyday reality. They do not have Wi-Fi in their homes or strong enough data on their phones to support telehealth services. This same deficiency means a widening gap between rural and low-income Americans without broadband and Americans with it. We have seen through this pandemic that life has moved online seemingly overnight. Now, Americans are going to online to access healthcare, to search for jobs or benefits, and to complete their schoolwork. And yet, so many of our constituents do not have the connectivity needed to accomplish these seemingly simple tasks. Americans without the same access to high-speed internet are simply being left behind. I am asking for full funding for programs like Reconnect, so the U.S. Department of Agriculture can partner with private telecommunications providers to bring high-speed broadband and related infrastructure to the 1 in 5 Americans living in a rural area. According to the FCC, more than 30% of rural Americans do not have access to broadband. That means more than 30% of our rural constituents across this country are hearing about telehealth but can't access this. We have an opportunity to help these Americans in a tangible way. I hope you will join me in supporting these interconnected funding priorities. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now hear from the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Barragán, for 3 minutes. And Ms. Barragán, I understand you cannot stay until the end of the hearing, so we will take any questions for you immediately after your testimony. After Ms. Barragán, we will be taking all member testimony before turning to questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowey and Ranking Member Granger, for allowing me to speak on my request for fiscal year 2021. Black and brown communities like mine and those across the country bear the burden of environmental and health inequities, from the lack of access to healthy foods and green spaces to air pollution that contributes to respiratory diseases and other ailments. Our communities get shortchanged. I would like to focus my time on 3 crucial requests that are necessary for improving the health and the well-being of communities like mine and many across this country. The first one is the CDC's Social Determinants of Health Program report language. The social and economic conditions have a major influence on individual and community health. This includes education level, housing, employment, and access to healthy foods. These social determinants of health disproportionately affect Black and Brown communities in my district and across the country. Unfortunately, most local and state health departments lack funding and tools to address this issue. This is why I'm requesting report language modeled after my bill, the Improving Social Determinants of Health, to designate and fund a social determinants of health program at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The program would award grants to public health and community organizations to address social determinants of health in communities and to universities and nonprofits to research best practices to tackle this issue. This program would go a long way to improve health outcomes and reduce health inequities. My second program is the EPA's Targeted Airshed Grant Program. Now, many of my constituents live within 1,000 feet of a freeway in close proximity to thousands of heavy-duty trucks by them each and every day, many bringing cargo to the Port of Los Angeles. The particulate matter produced by the truck's diesel emissions contribute to some of the worst air quality in the country and can trigger asthma attacks, causing lung cancer, increase the risk of heart attacks and strokes, and may impact pregnancy. In short, this pollution is deadly. It is not an understatement for health experts to call the high traffic area a diesel death zone. That's why my second request is for $75 million for the EPA's Agency Targeted Airshed Program. This is a program that provides funding to pollution control agencies to reduce particulate matter and to improve our health. My third program is the National Institutes of Health Minority Centers of Excellence program. I'm requesting $25 million for the National Institutes of Health Minority Centers of Excellence program. The Minority Centers of Health program supports research in minority health and health disparities. There would be a huge benefit across the country. The research conducted at the centers will have a direct and huge impact on addressing minority health and health disparities. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. And I understand you cannot stay until the end of the hearing. So if there are any questions for you, we will have them now. Does any member of the Appropriations Committee have a question for Ms. Barragán? Hearing none, thank you very much for appearing before us, and you are excused. And we will now hear from the distinguished gentleman
Madam
from
Chair,
Illinois.
I did have a question. Excuse me.
Oh, I am sorry, Ms. Capter. I apologize and welcome. I didn't see you.
I think I hit the wrong button, Madam Chair, but thank you very much.
Now
and
I
will
feel
be-
better. So it's a technical problem.
Right. I don't know if Congresswoman Barragán is still on the line. Is she still on?
I can hear now. I'm sorry, Chairwoman Lowey, I couldn't hear when you were speaking. There was a technical stop.
All right. My question is very brief. First of all, thank you very much for your testimony this morning and for your leadership in so many areas. In terms of the CDC and social determinants of health, I just wanted to point out several members of our committee and beyond have worked very hard on food production in urban regions in order to meet the nutritional shortfalls. Are you also asking for special attention for food production in nutrition short food deserts?
So this bill would put it up to local public agencies and departments to decide where the shortage and the need is to address these inequities. So if your local public health department decided that it was a social determinant of health impact there, they could then apply for funding under this program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate your being with us today, Ms. Barragán.
Thank you,
Does
Madam
any
Chairwoman.
other member of the Appropriations Committee have a question for Ms. Barragán? Well, thank you for being with us. We appreciate, is that somebody else asking?
Madam Chair, this is Jeff Fortenberry.
Yes,
Madam
well,
Chair.
hello. Do you have
Yes.
a question?
Thank you very much. Just a quick comment from Ms. Barragán. There's a long history. Thank you for your testimony. Very insightful. There's a long history, particularly in the Ag Subcommittee, in which Ms. Capter has helped, as well as Shelley Pingree and others, looking at this concept of food as medicine. And so as we continue to think holistically as to how we appropriately deliver healthcare as well as proper nutrition, particularly in underserved communities, this essential linkage between health outcomes and food is going to become more and more critical. So I want to thank you for raising this, and would suggest politely, if you want to go further into this, there's some real expertise on the Ag Subcommittee in this space in which we're trying to do innovative things. But thank you for the input, very insightful.
Well, thank you for that. Certainly follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barragán. Thank you. Any other questions for her? Otherwise, you have a lovely day, and thank you for taking your time to appear before us.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
We will now hear from the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowey and Ranking Member Granger, for providing members with the opportunities to share our thoughts on the fiscal year 21 appropriations bill. I've come to urge funding to address the greatest existential threat to life on Earth, climate change. That includes investing in solutions we know that work and are ready to be deployed, as well as robust funding for our nation's climate change research programs to pave the way for a clean energy future. From increasingly intense storms to sea level rise, from extreme heat to prolonged droughts, the Earth's climate is making its displeasure known, and it comes at an ever-growing cost to us all. In your backyard, it's in my backyard, and there's no debate among anyone who is qualified to debate about the merits of the science. We have to take unparalleled action over the next decade to ensure that the global temperature remains below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The fourth National Climate Assessment concluded we must, quote, act aggressively to adapt to current impacts and mitigate future catastrophes, and confirmed that, quote, without significant global greenhouse gas mitigation and regional adaptation efforts, climate change is expected to cause substantial losses to infrastructure and property and impede the rate of economic growth over this century. In spite of that, the Trump administration has repetitively sought to severely cut or even eliminate climate research programs. The president's 2021 budget requests cut climate science. It eliminates the Department of Energy's ARPA-E program, which creates the renewable energy technologies necessary to decarbonize our economy, cuts the EPA's Air and Energy Research Program by 65%, cuts the NOAA Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research by 40%. Without strong funding for these programs, we will not be equipped to address the greatest challenge that is facing our species. We got to do two things. Number one, we must invest in those climate solutions that we already know work. Across the world, there are legions of nations with similar, if not better, qualities of life who use less than 50% of the energy the US does per dollar of GDP. It's because they've recognized that policies that make us more efficient in our energy use yield positive returns. Now, what that means, to dumb it down, is that even if you are a tinfoil hat-wearing climate denier, your economic interest alone is sufficient to embrace those policies. That'll require new incentives for low carbon technologies, but even more important is the elimination of subsidies for fossil fuels and associated regulatory barriers to economic and environmental sustainability. We have the opportunity to green up our federal building and vehicle fleet, and we must invest in our clean energy economy by funding the DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at $2.8 billion for its critical programs. Second thing we have to do is to invest in a massive RD&D effort for those areas of the economy where we do not have low carbon alternatives. For many industrial products, including steel, concrete, cement, and fertilizer, fossil fuels use as a chemical rather than fossil energy input. And if we are going to get to a zero net carbon economy, we are going to have to invent wholly new ways to make those materials. That's going to require robust funding across the entire government, including NOAA, EPA, DOT, DOE, Energy Office of Science, and the Department of Defense. Specifically, 582 million advanced research projects, 94 million in energy innovation hubs, and 130 billion in the energy frontier research centers. I hope the committee will consider these proposals. I look forward to working with any of you in any way I can. Chairman Lowey, thank you again for having me here today, and thank you for your leadership.
And thank you. We appreciate your testimony. We will now hear from the gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Finkenauer, for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Lowey and Ranking Member Granger. I am so excited to join you all today to talk about an issue that's very personal to me. I am here to ask for increased funding for endometriosis research. Endometriosis is a painful condition that involves tissue growing outside of the uterus and putting pressure on other organs. It is the leading cause of infertility and also affects 1 in 10 women and 7 million women in the United States. And I happen to be one of them. Earlier this year, I spoke on the House floor about my story and shared it publicly for the very first time. I also launched the bipartisan House Endometriosis Caucus, co-chaired by, I know I saw her on here as well, Congresswoman González-Colón, and also have folks I know on this committee who are part of that caucus as well. And the reason I wanted to do that was, one, to raise awareness of the issue, but also to make sure that we gave voice to women who have this and push for more funding, not just funding to deal with the pain that doesn't work for every woman, not just funding for mitigation, but also funding to make sure that we find out the cause of endometriosis, why this happens to women, and make sure that we can do better for the next generation as well, because they deserve it. That's why I'm asking the committee to include report language to direct the National Institute for Child and Human Development to provide at least $26 million to endometriosis research in fiscal year 2021. This would double the investment of where we currently are, but it's still more than, it's more, we still obviously need to do more. Historically, the NIH has dedicated as little as 82 cents to endo research for every woman who has it. I'm also asking that endometriosis remains eligible for funding under the peer-reviewed medical research program at the Department of Defense. During fiscal year 2018, endometriosis was eligible for funding under the program, but was actually dropped from the list of eligible conditions in fiscal year 2019, despite the pressing research opportunities in this area. Endometriosis was also added back then to the list of eligible conditions for peer-reviewed medical research program for fiscal year 2020, but this creates obviously some uncertainty and ultimately hurts progress when it comes to better understanding this condition. I ask that the committee ensure that endometriosis is eligible in fiscal year 2021 and for years to come. Again, I have shared this story with so many women, and I've heard the stories of women and folks who have come up to me and shared theirs. We have to do more, and I am grateful for this committee for listening, and hopefully we can see the results of that.
Thank you very, very much. And I appreciate your testimony and sharing your personal experiences with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now hear from the gentlewoman from Puerto Rico, Ms. González-Colón, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member, for this opportunity to discuss in detail many of the requests that I actually did before most of your subcommittees early this year. In addition to the several programs I'm also supporting. First, I will briefly mention some of this. First, I'm requesting the committee to increase the nutritional assistance program blueprint for Puerto Rico. In our case, it's just NAP. This will allow us to increase benefit levels to the 1.4 million participants on the island, whose benefits are drastically below the national average on this NAP. Second, for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, I'm requesting additional resources to help advance projects like Rio Guayanilla and Rio Grande de Loíza projects, among others. which received partial supplemental funding in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. I'm also asking to increase the number of new construction projects, start projects not less than 8, and at least 4 be for ecosystem restoration projects. These will better position projects already authorized by Congress, including the Caño Martin Peña ecosystem restoration project in San Juan. Third, I'm requesting language encouraging the executive branch to fully utilize the Defense Production Act to increase the next supply and capacity and medical supplies produced in the U.S. In the case of Puerto Rico, 47% of our economy is just pharmaceutical and medical devices. So we are ready. We have the infrastructure for these industries, as well as a skilled workforce that stands ready to ramp up any production and help secure our national supply chain. I also asked the committee to support the Coast Guard request for $29.2 million to transition Air Station Borinquen in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, from MH-65 to MH-60 helicopters. This will increase the Coast Guard capabilities in the Caribbean, providing critical resources to combat transnational criminal organizations that threatens our national security. Also, I'm requesting language directing FEMA to engage with local authorities in Puerto Rico, still recovering from the hurricanes and the earthquakes of 2020, and to achieve prompt disbursement of public assistance payments, reimbursements for all the participants and municipalities as well. I also asked the committee to reject the Forest Service proposed closure of the International Institute of Tropical Forestry, headquartered in Puerto Rico, that has been vital advancing knowledge of tropical ecosystem at the local, national, and international level. And of course, I'm supporting the request of Ms. Finkenauer in terms of the endometriosis. We am a co-chair of that caucus. And thank you again, Chairwoman, for your patience and all the members of this committee. With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Madam
for your
Chair?
testimony. Yes,
Madam Chair, Marcy Kaptur, I have a question, please.
please go ahead, Marcy Kaptur.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congresswoman González-Colón, I would just ask your help. Congresswoman Dolores González-Colón, I would just ask your help with the administration. As you know, you've appeared before our subcommittee in asking for many of these very, very important construction projects and environmental projects, and we are having trouble with the Trump administration. So I just wanted you to be aware that some of the interests in Puerto Rico, perhaps they might focus on the administration, and that would make our job easier on our subcommittee on energy and water. And I just wish to state that for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if you allow me just a second to respond. We just got a meeting today with our Army Corps of Engineers as soon as I finish this meeting, just for some of those projects as well.
Thank you.
I would like to remind all my colleagues, except for a few members that have to go to another hearing, we're going to save our questions till the end of the testimony. And now I am very pleased to yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 3 minutes. Mr. Griffith, I understand you cannot stay until the end of the hearing, so we will take any questions for you immediately after your testimony. I understand that you are needed at the same hearing as Ms. Barragán, and after your testimony, we will postpone all questions until all witnesses have testified. Please proceed.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for your consideration on that with our Energy and Commerce hearing going on as well. I do appreciate you holding your hearing today, and I appreciate all the rehearsals that we did that helped us be ready. And I appreciate the opportunity to highlight a matter of great importance to my district as we move forward with this appropriation process. A top priority of mine for many years has been to address the needs of adequate funding for coal communities in Virginia and Central Appalachia, and throughout much of Appalachia as well, to reclaim abandoned mine lands in a way that will support economic development and transition our economy that has been built on coal. Money for abandoned mine land reclamation for the top 3 states with the most unmet needs, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, has been included in spending bills that have come to the House the past few years. While those states have more sites in need of cleanup, the second-tier states, Virginia, Alabama, and Ohio, also have a legacy of coal mining that includes sites that need restoration. Over the past years, with the help of members of this committee and my friend from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, we have worked to expand this program to those next 3 Appalachian states with the greatest unmet needs, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Calvert for all of his help through the years. I have worked with this committee to ensure that additional support for one Appalachian community does not come at the expense of another. In total, we have been successful in securing $40 million for Virginia, $10 million each year over the past 4 years, and that includes the other states, the other second-tier states. The top 3 states have gotten $30 million each per year. We have seen already some amazing projects come forward as a result of this pilot project in Virginia. Some examples include a large solar project, a project that will plant hemp on previously mined lands, a sustainable community farming project, the cleanup of land that was once a coal preparation plant and is now only a coal fines pit. That's all that's left is this pit, but they're cleaning that up to transition that into an industrial site encompassing 232 acres. And this is one of our problems in the mountains is we don't have flat land. We need flat land. So this is I could go on and on. I've got a whole list that's in the written statement. The bottom line is this has been a big help in that deep part of Southwest Virginia where they mine coal or have mined coal. And it is very, very important to the area that we continue to receive this money. And there are more projects coming up each year. And we're using them for economic development purposes, for tourism, which also is economic development. And we're cleaning up the landscape that was left by those mines that did not do the proper cleanup in the end. And with that, Madam Chair, again, I appreciate your consideration so much, and I yield back.
Well, I thank you so very much for your testimony. If there are any questions, because Mr. Griffith can't wait to the end, he's going to another hearing. Seeing no questions, we will move on, and I thank you very, very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
We will now hear from the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowey and Ranking Member Granger, for allowing me to testify before your committee today. I'm here today to highlight the importance of research and development for a disease that is very near and dear to my heart. Spina bifida affects approximately 166,000 individuals in the U.S., and over half are adults. It is a birth defect for which there is no cure. It results in a spinal cord injury before a baby is born. And spina bifida is the most complex, commonly occurring, permanently disabling birth defect that is compatible with life. Unfortunately, much is still unknown about this disease. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience to explain why funding for this disease is so important to me. My mother is a carrier of spina bifida, and my parents experienced their first loss of a child when my oldest sister died of spina bifida shortly after birth. My second oldest sister also has spina bifida and spent the first 6 months of her life in a hospital. And later in life, when she found out that she was pregnant, the doctors told her that her daughter would also have spina bifida, my great niece. She chose life anyway, and her daughter, my niece, was born and spent her entire life in a wheelchair. Even in a wheelchair, my niece was able to get pregnant and gave life to our beautiful, healthy great nephew, Daniel, who's now 10 years old, and a testament to why life should never give up on anybody else's life. Every single life has value and purpose, and unfortunately for spina bifida is limited. The only place in the federal government that's specifically studying this complex condition for children and adults is the spina bifida program at the National Center on Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities at the CDC through the National Spina Bifida Patient Registry and the Spina Bifida Collaborative Care Network. For all the individuals living with spina bifida, I support you, and I support increased funding for the spina bifida program. As I ask for your consideration, I truly appreciate for the opportunity to bring light to the needed funding for spina bifida research. I want to thank you for allowing me to testify before the Appropriations Committee, and I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now hear from the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lowey, Ranking Member Granger, members of the committee, for allowing me to testify today. As the committee begins to craft the fiscal year 2021 appropriations bill, I'm here to request funding for three very important things going on in Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district that impact safety and security for our entire nation. The first thing I'd like to discuss, and we're sort of aware of as we continue to reemerge from this uncertain time, one of the lessons we've learned is the importance of the United States and our allies to not be reliant on China for important medical and defense products. One of these is the domestic supply of tungsten, which is used in many U.S. defense products such as penetrators, artillery projectiles, and tank shells. The U.S. Geological Survey determined that tungsten is a critical mineral. Additionally, the fiscal year 2019 Defense Authorization Act prohibited the acquisition of certain tungsten products from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. At latest count, China controls over 80% of tungsten mining in the world and remains the world's leading producer of tungsten by a large margin. China uses its supply dominance to manipulate the global market. Given all that we've learned about China's intentions during COVID-19, and with China's growing military influence throughout the world, it is clear that we need to be incentivizing domestic production of this critical metal so that going forward, the United States and its allies no longer have to rely on foreign sources, especially China, for any of our tungsten supply. That is why I've requested report language and just over $15 million for the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program. This is an effective tool to support the domestic industrial base and can be also used to further strengthen our domestic tungsten industry in order to meet defense needs. Also, earlier this year, I testified before the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee about the importance of funding for the Federal Transit Administration's bus testing facility program, which has been located at the Pennsylvania State University's campus since 1989. The testing, which has been conducted at Penn State's world-class research facilities, has saved government and industry stakeholders hundreds of millions of dollars and identified operational problems with buses before they become community issues. Without enough funding provided in the fiscal 2021 BRTC, will not have the resources to test new model buses beyond 2021. And we're asking for about $5 million. With that, the last thing I have to talk about would be the support of the Department of Transportation's better utilizing investments to leverage development or build transportation discretionary grant program. Communities in Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district have seen the impact of build grants and what it can do for economic development, transportation safety projects, and continuing funding is critical to support these goals. I hope this committee will consider supporting the President's budget request of $1 billion for the Build Grant Program for fiscal year 2021. Again, thank you, Chairwoman Lowey, Ranking Member Granger, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today about these important issues. Any additional questions or on this information I can take now, or I do have a meeting coming up too. If there's questions that come up, maybe you can contact my office, and our Legislative Director, Aaron Wilson, would be happy to supply any kind of background information.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now hear from the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lowey, Ranking Member Granger. Before I focus on the fiscal year 2021 appropriations bills, I do want to talk about the HEROES Act, which I hope will be the base for negotiation with the Senate. The HEROES Act contains critical money for medical research on COVID, including $500 million for the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, $1 billion for NIH, $3.5 billion for BARDA to develop therapeutics and vaccines, and an additional $500 million for BARDA for the construction and equipping of U.S.-based manufacturing facilities for drugs. This is critical. So far, we've spent less than 1/4% of the crisis money on medical research, and we need to preserve those programs that have already passed the House. There's also some report language that I think would be helpful in guiding the expenditure of that research money, and I've gotten it to both the chair of this committee and the chair of the relevant subcommittee. As to the 2021 bills, the most important provision is one that doesn't cost you any money. It is doing what is already in the base text from the Defense Appropriations Bill, and that is to preserve the language that we've had in the bill continuously since 2012, dealing with the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act is the only effective restraint on presidents sending our troops into battle without congressional approval. Every president since the 1970s has claimed that they are not bound constitutionally by the War Powers Act. In 2011, I offered a War Powers Act fiscal enforcement provision on the floor. It passed. It's been in every one of your bills since then. And many constitutional scholars who believe that the War Powers Act is not binding have come to the conclusion that because of Congress's near absolute power of the purse, that this provision makes the War Powers Act binding on presidents. I'll ask that you include $2 million, $2 million, I'm not asking for a lot, for Cindy language outreach by the Department of State and by our global media, U.S. Agency for Global Media. Sind is a very important language in Pakistan, yet we tend to reach out only in the Urdu language, which is spoken by far fewer Pakistanis. Pakistan is critical to our national security and our work to control global terrorism. We were able, thank you, Madam Chair, to secure $500,000 in funding last year. We need more to reach out to people who speak the Sindhi language. I want to thank this committee for its sustained support of the U.S.-Armenia relationship, and I urge you to include $1.5 million for the Armenian people of Artsakh. We have funded mine removal there, and whether it's mine removal or meeting health and education projects, it's critical that this bill provide that $1.5 million for the people of Artsakh. And finally, I urge that we support the cooperative research efforts between the United States and Israel. We put up half the money, Jerusalem puts up half the money, and in particular, the $2 million that we need for the U.S. Israel Binational Industrial Research and Development Foundation, known as BIRD. So I have not asked for any new money over $2 or $4 million with an M, and I tried to be restrained. I'm available for questions at the end of your hearing or now.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will now hear from the gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Titus, for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Lowey and Ranking Member Granger, for the opportunity to speak to you from Las Vegas. Before I get to the main reason I'm addressing you this morning, I want to thank you, Chairwoman Lowey, and Ms. Capter and some of the members of your committee for your continued opposition to providing additional funding for Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository. Due to your principled stance, the administration's budget for fiscal year 2021 requests no additional funding for this dangerous project. And I look forward to continuing to work with you in support of consent-based efforts to address the nation's nuclear waste. I'm actually joining you today, though, to discuss an issue of paramount importance to U.S. national security and to the health of all Americans, and especially those here in my backyard. Prior to serving in Congress, I spent much of my career in the classroom, where I was a professor of political science. A major focus of my academic work was on the history and politics of atomic testing. I taught here at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where locals could go outside and stand and watch mushroom clouds rising over the desert of Nevada from the atmospheric tests that were conducted up until the early 60s at the Nevada test site. Decades of Cold War patriots risked their lives to protect our freedom and defend democracy around the world. We later learned, however, that the federal government's efforts in testing these weapons contributed to cancers and premature deaths. Many Americans living downwind, herding sheep, working in uranium mines, or building those destructive weapons were adversely affected. The NNSA itself admitted in 2013 that underground testing in Nevada led to the release of radioactivity into the environment, particularly the groundwater. And often there were ventings that allowed the dangerous materials, radioactive cloud, to leak into the atmosphere. Now the Trump administration is considering asking Nevadans to put themselves in harm's way once again for an unjustified experiment that would make our country less secure. Each year over the last 2 decades, the Department of Energy has certified that our national stockpile is safe and secure. The U.S. already maintains a technological advantage over our adversaries due to our advances in subcritical testing under the Stockpile Stewardship Program. Being tough on Russia and China means ensuring that the global moratorium on explosive nuclear weapons testing remains in place. We don't need to give them a license to detonate new weapons. So we must continue to ensure the safety and reliability of our nuclear stockpile through these subcritical tests, while encouraging other nations to maintain those same standards, not encouraging them to obtain or test additional nuclear weapons. Earlier this month, I introduced the Planet Act to prohibit the use of funds to prepare for or to conduct an explosive nuclear test that produces any yield. And I would ask you and this committee to work with me to help mandate that no federal funds may be set aside or used for this dangerous experiment that would needlessly put Nevadans and all Americans in danger and restart the Cold War or the nuclear arms race. So I thank you for your time and consideration and look forward to working with you.
And I thank you for your testimony. And we will now hear from the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, for 3 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Nita, Lowey, and Ranking Member Kay Granger. Thank you for your leadership on the committee, and best wishes, Chairwoman Lowey, on your retirement. Roxanne and I cherish our friendship with you and Steve, which we established during our January delegation visit to Poland and Israel. It was an honor to be with you in Jerusalem, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu correctly praised you as a superstar. I am grateful to represent the home of the Savannah River site. The site was constructed during the 1950s to achieve victory in the Cold War. The site maintains its importance through its national laboratory, the NNSA missions, and environmental cleanup. I support the President's budget request for the following missions. The Savannah River Plutonium Processing Facility. This facility will support a 2-site solution, fulfilling the nuclear posture review requirement. Tritium sustainment. This line item supports the Savannah River Tritium Enterprise, which prepares the nation's only tritium supply and which supports the funding for the tritium finishing facility, which is so critical to our country. The surplus plutonium disposition. This project applies the dilute and dispose strategy to remove excess weapons-grade plutonium from the site. The Savannah River liquid tank waste stabilization and disposition. With the expectation of the salt waste processing facility to start operations this year, these funds will support processing of radioactive waste into non-hazardous saltstone and the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative. The AMC will be an innovation hub, accelerating technology development for cleanup missions to create jobs. I asked the committee to support increases, $45 million to the Savannah River Risk Management Operations Account. The site is the home of H Canyon, the only hardened nuclear chemical separations plant still operating. Unfortunately, the H Canyon has been underfunded, with hundreds of metric tons of low enrichment uranium yet to be processed through H Canyon. It is critical to accelerate operations. $6.5 million to the Savannah River Community and Regulatory Support. This request maintains and reinstates payment in lieu of taxes to local schools and emergency services. This is crucial as nearly half of the geographic area of Barnwell County is owned by the site, which obviously impacts county services. An additional issue of critical importance is the new Savannah Bluff and Dam. The lock and dam currently provide a body of water or a pool upstream for industrial and municipal uses for affecting thousands of jobs, as well as recreation and waterfront development for South Carolina and Georgia. The Corps of Engineers must not take any action that would reduce the physical level of 114.5. The level is required by the date of enactment of the 2016 Water Infrastructure Improvements and Nations Act. Any plan that is not in accordance with the WIN Act wastes taxpayers' resources, which are better spent alternative consistent with the will of Congress to maintain 114.5 feet. Thank you for your time. This request, I yield back.
And I thank you for your very kind words. I really enjoyed being with you, and I thank you for your testimony.
Well, it was all deserved, and I'm so proud of the Prime Minister giving you and Steve such positive recognition. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you when we get back in person. Thank you. We will now hear from the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lowey and Ranking Member Granger and esteemed members of the Appropriations Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. With the official launch of the new U.S. Development Finance Corporation, January 2nd, 2020, I thank the committee for its leadership in providing the necessary resources to kickstart this critical new agency. The establishment of the DFC represents one of the most significant reforms of U.S. foreign assistance in decades. The DFC is positioned to play a much larger role in advancing global development and U.S. foreign policy interests while offering developing nations an alternative to China's predatory lending Belt Road Initiative and their policy of debt trap diplomacy. Our purpose is to help developing nations transition to a mutually beneficial trade relationship with the United States and move from aid to trade as quickly as possible. Despite the general success of the DFC since its launch, there remains an issue that I respectfully ask this committee to address in order for the DFC to perform as intended by Congress. Specifically, how to fund adequately the extremely important authority that the BUILD Act furnished the DFC with respect to equity. By providing the DFC with equity authority, Congress enabled the DFC to invest in highly developmental projects in very poor and fragile settings. It also will allow the DFC to enter new strategic co-investments with our international DFC partners in order to strengthen our global economic investments and to more effectively offer an alternative again to China's BRI. Without the equity authority as intended by Congress, the DFC will not be able to meet the challenge our economic competitors in strategic regions around the world offer. For these reasons, we ask the Appropriations Committee to prioritize capacity of the DFC as directed by the BUILD Act, which authorize equity investments up to 35% of total exposure, or $21 billion out of $60 billion over a 7-year authorization period included in the legislation. Again, I respectfully request the committee's support funding the DFC's equity and authority at $150 million, consistent with the fiscal year 2020 conference agreement. The administration's budget request for this year would continue the practice followed last year by recommending an appropriations to fund equity on a dollar-for-dollar basis. Not only does such an appropriations place more pressure on the limited resources of the appropriations process, but it also presumes that every dollar of equity invested would be lost, which is wrong. I'm working with the BUILD Act co-sponsors, which had strong bipartisan support in both chambers, as well as the federal budget experts, to introduce legislation that would fund equity authority without requiring annual dollar-for-dollar appropriations, without imposing inordinate risks on the Treasury Department or the U.S. taxpayers. This bill does this by amending the BUILD Act to treat equity by investments of the DFC as a federal credit program under the Federal Credit Reform Act of 1990 and would require an upfront annual appropriations at a fraction of the cost of the current dollar-for-dollar approach. I look forward to working with this committee further on this extremely important long-term fix of the DFC scoring. And again, I just want to thank you for working with us on this. This is the biggest reform we've had. And I look forward to answering any questions. Thank you all.
Well, I thank the gentleman for your testimony. Mr. Yoho is our final witness. I will now move to the question and answer portion of this hearing. As a reminder, each member of the committee will be given 5 minutes to question the witnesses, and we will proceed in order of committee seniority, alternating between the majority and minority. When I call on you, Please unmute your line to begin your questions, or simply notify me that you do not have any questions and I will move on. Ms. Granger?
Thank you, Chairman Lowey. I do not have any questions, but I want to thank the members for making this time available to us, and you're always so gracious with this. We could hear about all their priorities, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Granger, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. You are a good partner. Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leadership on this and for your years and years of service. Just think, this is the first video hearing that the Appropriations Committee has ever held in the history of the country. So you're establishing a precedent here. And thank you so very much for your dispatch. And I apologize for asking questions out of turn. I didn't know that rule. I just wanted to thank Sean Caston. I have no question of his testimony, but thank you very, very much for what you said about climate change. Obviously, our subcommittee on energy and water is very aware of the report that has just been completed. And we look forward to working with all the members of that across our subcommittees on appropriations to proceed forward and implement those recommendations. I wanted to say just a note to Congressman Sherman in terms of the bird relationship with Israel. It was funded. We carried it in the House bill. We intend to do that again. And finally, I just had a brief question to ask Mr. Griffith about mine cleanup. And that is, as he looks toward his own region and others that have been similarly impacted by the mining industry, in terms of new economic opportunity, where does he see that lie? In extracting rare earths from coal? Or are you looking towards solar conversion? Could you give us a sense of what is happening in your part of the country? And I will end with that.
I would just like to tell Ms. Capter that Mr. Griffith has left. So we'll have to just save that question for when you see him in Washington.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman? Madam Chairman?
Yes?
Could I say something briefly to Ms. Capter?
Sure.
I thought she might ask me about the test site, but I wanted to say thank you to her and her subcommittee for funding the test site as it exists now so it can modernize and maintain its relationship with the national labs, and they can continue to do those critical tests, that the subcritical tests, so we don't need to do the nuclear weapons test. And that's very important to maintain that, and I thank them for providing the funding for that.
I'd like to thank the Congresswoman for her consistent leadership on Yucca Mountain, as well as this extraordinarily important issue of nuclear testing and the administration's proposal, which is very troubling and very upsetting to actually the global order and all the treaties that we've been a part of. And thank you for bringing it home to Nevada and what it means for people in our country. We're very fortunate. You are the Congresswoman from Las Vegas. I know you share that responsibility, but in this nuclear arena, you truly are one of our most important voices. So thank you for testifying today.
Thank you.
And thank you. And now, Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert, do you have a question?
You have me now?
I do. I have you.
Great. Well, thank you for this virtual hearing, Madam Chairman. It was very interesting and historic. And so thank you for your leadership in this and all those who testified, but I have no questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being part of it. It is a historic day. Mr. Bishop. Is Mr. Bishop there?
Yes, he is, Madam Chair.
Oh, Mr. Bishop, thank you. It's your turn if you have any questions.
I do not have any questions, but I associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Calvert, and I'm very, very delighted that we were able to participate in this historic hearing. I do not have any questions, but I look forward to our continued work and our deliberations and completing our appropriations bills as soon as we can possibly get them done. And thank you so very kindly for your leadership of the committee, as well as to that of the ranking member, Ms. Granger, and we look forward to working together to get our business done. Thank you.
And I want to thank you, my dear friend, Mr. Bishop, for those very, very kind words. It's always been a pleasure working with you, and we still have some more work to do. So thank you for being part of this historic day. And now, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's good to see you. And I'm not surprised the first woman chairman of our committee was the first person to do a virtual hearing as well. So trailblazer all the way through. Now we just need to make sure you get all the bills across the line while you're still in Congress. Let me quickly associate myself with all the witnesses that called for additional money on biomedical research in a variety of areas. I think one of the proudest records of this committee is that under both Republican and Democratic leadership, it's steadily increased NIH funding by 39% over the last 5 years, CDC funding by 24%, strategic stockpile by 34%, and it set up the first infectious disease rapid response fund. All of those were bipartisan decisions. All of them, I think, were wise decisions, and we certainly have seen how wise. I would hope we're going to have a tough budget year, as you know better than me, Madam Chair. But I hope we can continue to build on those things, not simply in supplementals, which are sort of one and done. And I know there's a good chance we'll be able to do more in a supplemental to deal with coronavirus, hopefully in the month of July. But regardless, I think the long-term security of the country depends on the kind of investments that we heard witness after witness on both sides of the aisle call for today. So I just hope under you and Ranking Member Granger's leadership, we can continue to make those wise investments in biomedical research and life-saving cures. It's a wise thing, and it's something the American people want us to do. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And if any members were inadvertently skipped due to technical errors, I'd like to address that now. Ms. McCullum, are you here?
Yes, Madam. Yes, Madam Chair, I am here. It's thank you for holding this. It was great to see everybody and to listen to the testimony, and to my good friend from California. Ken, you don't look a year older since I saw you last. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there anybody else that we didn't hear from? I think Mr. Fortenberry, did you want to say something else?
Madam Chair, this is Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. I'm here as well.
Or no?
I'm trying
Ms.
to.
Wasserman-Schultz, did you want to say anything else? No?
Other than congratulations on this historic occasion and on embarking on sadly your last fiscal year presiding over our appropriations process. Let's make it a good one.
Thank you very much. I just want to say to all, I don't know, does anybody else want to say anything? Mr. Fortenberry?
Hi, Nita.
Oh, have you been here, Miss Frankel?
Yep.
Would you like to say something?
Just want to say hello. Thank everybody for testifying. I yield back. No questions. Good to see you all.
Madam Chair, Jeff Fortenberry here.
Mr. Palazzo, I guess, Mr. Palazzo, we did not call on you.
Well,
do you have any comments, Mr. Palazzo?
Yes, ma'am. I hope you can hear me. I do want to just lend myself to the remarks of the other members and congratulate you on this historic event. I think your staff are doing a fantastic job helping us technically challenged members come into the 21st century. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate also the members testifying and coming before the committee. The one thing that does stand out, I know the representative from Puerto Rico mentioned transnational criminal organizations and how they're using the Puerto Rico and the Caribbeans to smuggle in tons of hard narcotics. And I got to tell you that the thing that's doing the most to help us win the war against drugs in the Caribbean is the national security cutters. They pay for themselves, and I know we've had conversations on how important they are, not just in the Caribbean, but in South America, East Coast and West Coast, and preventing those drugs from making their way into America. I think it's a great investment. I hope we continue to focus on that platform and how important it is to protecting communities and lives here in America to keep those drugs out of our country. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you. And I want to apologize to my dear friend, Mr. Fortenberry. Did we skip you and your very wise comments? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's okay. I've enjoyed the hearing and listening to everyone, and I'm just not fast enough with the thumb on the mute or the unmute button. But thank you for your accommodation. Great job today working through this, and we're all, yes, appreciative of your leadership as we work through this final appropriation season, or your final appropriation season. Thank you so much as well. Let me add my voice to those who have shown gratitude to you. A couple of broad points. One is Congressman Balderson earlier had mentioned the issue of rural broadband. During COVID, we've all seen the power of actually using digital technology and how it can advance telemedicine, teleeducation, telework. This has tectonic implications for society. And yet there's so many people, as he pointed out, about 30% of rural America may not have adequate service. Chairman Bishop and I have worked aggressively on this in a bipartisan manner to the tune of about $600 million last year. We continue to prioritize this as a very smart tool for what I call the ecosystem of livability in rural America. So I appreciate his testimony. I want to add one note of caution, please. Look, a vision for environmental security in which we rapidly transition our country to sustainable and renewable resources is something that many of us believe is absolutely necessary, not only for environmental purposes, but the right type of economic, smart economic development, as well as national security considerations, continuing to wean ourselves off the hydrocarbons. It's helpful when we focus on that vision versus kind of shaming people who might have questions regarding the older constructs of climate science. I just would rather focus on how we actually build that consensus toward environmental security and get to the place in which we are heavily focused on the necessary public good of this rapid transition to renewable resources. And I think that more rapidly builds a consensus in how we get there, in agreement with those who had testified earlier in this regard. Finally, Mr. Yoho's comments were very, very insightful. And Madam Chair, I want to offer this. He's absolutely right by requiring the way the BUILD Act is written and the way it's been interpreted, a sort of dollar for dollar score on equity investment actually undermines the intent of the Development Finance Corporation, which is one of the more novel, innovative spaces for economic development and community well-being across the world, attacking structural poverty, lifting the best of the market system, and actually creating sustainability over the long term for America's investment. He's absolutely right. There's a flaw here. What I'm worried about, though, is a standalone bill to correct that is a necessary marker to lay down. I'm just wondering if we can do something in appropriations to help Mr. Yoho and those who very innovatively brought forward this idea, which we all agree with, to fix it in the appropriations process, or at least lay down some markers that gets us there. There's a problem with OMB. There's a problem with the way in which we're interpreting the scoring of this. I'm just wondering, again, if there's something inappropriate, not versus the standalone bill, but in parallel with the standalone bill that we can do to rapidly allow this International Development Finance Corporation to exercise its mission that was a strong bipartisan consensus as to how we go head to head with other world ideologies who are extracting resources and paying off people and not leaving any good in their wake. America leads in this space by the tune of about $25 billion a year in humanitarian assistance. This could be a force multiplier. So I really appreciate Mr. Yoho's testimony, but want to see if there might be something you're interested in. Madam Chair, you sort of tasked me with this last year. So if we can work together in the coming days to see if there might be something that we can supplement in the current approach bill to enforce what Mr. Yoho's correction to the earlier Build Act needs to be, I think that would be very helpful.
Let me just say, my friends, I always welcome your advice, your suggestions, so let's follow up. And if any members were inadvertently skipped due to technical errors, let's address that now. Do any other members of the committee want to share a comment or ask a question? I thank you again to the witnesses who have appeared today. You are now excused, and thank you as well to the appropriation members who have listened to the testimony from our colleagues. And as previously announced, the Appropriations Committee will begin marking up appropriation bills in subcommittee on July 6th and in full committee on July 9th. So it's going to be a very, very busy time. And I hope you will all be there because we plan to do these bills in DC through regular order. Not so regular, but as regular as we can. With that, thank you again for being part of this hearing, and the committee stands adjourned.